This is how to crochet a pumpkin. It's a super easy and beginner-friendly pattern, and you can make a bunch of them while watching TV because you don't have to actually count any stitches. I'm using medium weight yarn and a 4mm hook, and to start I'm going to make my slip knot, but I'm going to leave an extra long tail. This one is honestly a little bit too long, but it's fine. Next I'm going to chain 5, then I'm going to take my hook out of the loop, take the slip knot, move it over to the right, and I'm going to pick up that top loop of the first chain and then put my hook back into the original working loop. I'm doing this because I'm going to be working in the round, but I'm going to start with a very large ring and I don't want it to twist while I'm working, so by keeping the first loop in place, I can ensure that everything stays facing the right way. From here, I'm going to chain a total of 40 chains, but the number of chains isn't as important as the size, so this is actually where you determine what the size of your pumpkin is going to be. I want to have a 5-inch pumpkin or slightly smaller, so I want to make my chain about 4 inches, fold it in half like that. To close it, all I'm going to do is take that first loop and feed it through the second loop, and then I'm going to chain 1 to start row 1. And be sure to like and follow for part 2. For round 1, we are going to add a single crochet into every single chain around, and we're only going to work into the top loop. Normally I would say it doesn't matter which loop you work into, but in this case it does matter. You only want to work into one of the loops. I did want to make a note about the size of the pumpkin, so if you want to make a bigger one or a smaller one, totally up to you, you can do that simply by changing the number of chains you used in your beginning chain. So if you want to make a bigger one, then you can just use more chains. If you want to make a smaller one, use less. You can even go with a bigger yarn if you wanted to. The only thing about replacing the yarn is that you still want to make sure that you're using a hook that's at least one size smaller. If you already crochet tight, you're going to have an advantage here, because the key to using, or the reason you want to use a smaller hook, is so that there's no gaps in your work. You want it to be a tight fabric so that the stuffing doesn't show later on. But now that we have made our way all the way around, I'm going to go ahead and add my last single crochet, and then I'm going to finish my round by slip stitching into the top of the first stitch. So when you're looking for the first stitch, it is going to be that V right there. There's another V right next to it. That is our chain 1. We don't want to slip stitch into it. If you like this kind of stitch tutorial, be sure to like and follow for more. So for round 2, we are going to chain 1, and then we're going to add our first single crochet into the same stitch that we slip stitched into. And then we're going to add a single crochet all the way around, and that'll be everything for row 2. I do like to keep these sections short and sweet, so the beginning of row 3 is going to be in the next part, but I wanted you to get a clear visual of what it looks like at the end of row 2. The biggest thing is that we're no longer slip stitching into the first stitch to finish the round, meaning we're switching from finished rows or finished rounds to the spiraled method. If you've never heard of the spiral method, it is essentially where you create a seamless tube, and that is what we're going for. We don't want to have a ugly looking seam anywhere, so that is the best way to achieve it without having a raggedy looking bottom. Because sometimes if you start out with a large ring and you immediately go into a spiral, you can get it'll be noticeable where it started. If you haven't tried it, you may not know what I'm talking about, but that's what it is. But this is what it looks like at the end of row 2, or round 2, and I'll see you in round 3. For round 3, we are going to skip the slip stitch and the chain 1, and we're going to add our first single crochet right on top of that first stitch right there. And again, that's going to help us get rid of the seam while working in a spiral. So from here, we are no longer counting rounds, we're no longer counting stitches. If we were counting stitches in the beginning, I wasn't. But from here on out, you're just adding a single crochet into every single stitch, going into the exact same direction until your height is about 3.5 inches. That is the number that I'm going for. If you want to create a taller pumpkin, you would just create a taller tube or a longer tube. If you want to create a shorter pumpkin, you would just create a shorter tube. Now, the length or the height of this is not going to be the height of your pumpkin. Meaning, if you wanted to create like a 5-inch pumpkin, you would probably have to go up to 5.5 or 6 inches in order for your end result to be 5 inches tall. But the next time I see you, it'll be when your fabric is the height that you need, and then I'll show you how to sew the top and the bottom together and how to stuff it and how to make it look like a pumpkin. And again, if you enjoy these kind of close-up stitch tutorials, be sure to like and follow. I post them as much as I can. So this part's pretty short and sweet. I just wanted you to see what the end result looks like for this section. So I stopped adding stitches whenever I made it back to the slip knot, and it is 3 inches in height. I know I said I was going to go up to 3.5, but I guess I wanted to stop at 3. And then the width ended up being a little bit more than 4 inches, which I'm totally fine with. Now I'm just going to cut my yarn. I'm leaving a long tail because this one has to be long, and I'm just going to pull it through. I'm not going to worry about slip stitching to even it off or anything like that. This is literally it. Just cut it, leave a long tail, and pull it through. And I'll see you in the next part. For this next part, I'm going to use my yarn needle, and I'm going to thread it with the yarn coming off of the slip knot. Then I'm going to look at my edge, and those loops of yarn right there are the bottom loop of the beginning chain. So I'm going to work into every other loop, and I'm going to work from the inside out every single time and just pick up that loop. I'm going to do this all the way around, and then in the next part, I'll show you what it looks like when you pull it together and what to focus on. But this video is just to show you how to work into the loops. I'm trying to keep these parts short and concise so that, I don't know, I get overwhelmed with projects sometimes and patterns when I see everything at once because I don't have the patience. But if someone just tells me what to do in like short increments, I can do it pretty well. But you know the whole thing where you're supposed to read the test, read all the questions of the test before you start the test. I'm the kind of person that just like wants to go ahead and get started. So that's what I focus on with my videos. I know it bothers some people, but it's okay. It'll be fine. But here we are back at normal speed. I just wanted to show you the very last one, and it's going to be the one right there at the base of the slip knot. Right there. So now that we've woven through the loops, we're just going to pull it tight and focus on the inside not coming out through the center. That's the only thing I'm doing here. And then as you're pulling it, it's going to create bumps. You want those bumps. To me, it reminds me of like the bottom of a soda bottle. But here I have 5, and those are actually going to indicate the grooves of my pumpkin. From here, I'm just going to secure my tail by weaving it through a piece of yarn on the opposite side of where my tail ends. And then I'm just going to make a knot with it, pull it tight, and feed it through the center of the hole. Now the hole is going to appear a little big. That's fine. You actually need a little bit bigger for when we do the finishing pieces. So that's totally fine. You also don't have to worry about weaving in your ends. Just feed it through the hole and then cut it off so it's not as long, or you can leave it long, totally up to you, but it's not going to unravel. Especially once we add the stuffing, it'll be perfectly fine. Now we are going to start stuffing the pumpkin. I like to take a big piece first and then push it to the outside from the center. So when you're reading a pattern for like an amigurumi or a plushie or anything really that needs stuffed, they generally say to stuff and shape. And it took me a while to figure out what shaping meant, and that's essentially what it is. You stuff it, and then you use your fingers, or you can use a tool if it's too tight. In this case, fingers are fine. And you push it to the outside corners of your fabric so that your plushie can hold as much stuffing as possible. This is not one of those situations where less is more. The more stuffing you can fit in without it falling out, the better. Mostly because over time, especially if it's a well-loved plushie, it'll start to condense and look not as plump. So the more you can fit in at the beginning, the longer it'll last. But I think those are all the tips I have on stuffing right now. And be sure to like and follow for more. Now for this part, I'm using my yarn needle again to close the top of the pumpkin. And we're doing this the exact same way as the bottom by working into the front loop of every other stitch. And we're working from the inside out. It is literally the exact same. I'm not going to pull it closed until the next part. So if you want to do this part on your own and then come back to the next part, or if you want to watch it, I do find it satisfying. I did speed it up again, so it's not going to be at real time, but I don't know what else to say at the moment. So I'll just see you in the next part. If you want to keep watching it, feel free. And here we go. We're just going to go ahead and pull the yarn tight, and it's going to close it up. This is my favorite part, but I'm not going to lie. I didn't stuff it enough, and I don't realize it until I close it. At first, I was going to refilm it and just take that part out, but then I figured I'm probably not going to be the only person that understuffs their pumpkin, and I wanted you to see what it looks like when you understuff, and then show you how to fix that. But do you see how big those grooves are right there and how squishy it is? That's not good. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my finger in, or two, and I'm just going to open that hole back up. I wouldn't recommend doing this more than once, simply because it does weaken the yarn when you pull it tight. So over time, it might get a little fragile. But all I'm doing is I'm opening up just a little bit, and now I'm just stuffing in the inside first and then along the sides, so that when I pull it tight again, this time it'll be a little bit more plump and less squishy. But it's a super easy fix, and it makes a difference. But that's it for this part, and I'll see you in the next one. So now we're going to pull it closed again, and you can see the difference in the grooves and just what the pumpkin looks like. So the grooves are still there, they're going to be there, but it's not quite as short, I guess. To form the sides, we're going to take the yarn needle, feed it from the top all the way through the bottom hole, and then we are going to pull it tight. Now we're pulling it tight so that the top comes closer to the bottom, and it gives it a little bit more of a, to me, a pumpkin appearance. But for the sides, we are going to follow the groove right here, and we're going to drag it all the way back up to the top, and there's going to be a groove on, I guess, on the opposite side of it at the top. And then we're going to take the needle again, feed it through the center from the top to the bottom. Now my thumb here is pinching the yarn so that it doesn't gain any slack and stays tight. And that's just going to help me as we go. Now we're back at the bottom again. I'm going to find the next groove, travel all the way to the top, match it up with another groove, and go from the top to the bottom. I'm going to do that all the way around. Now, sometimes there's more grooves on one side than there are on the other. That's totally fine. Just like a real pumpkin isn't perfect, these pumpkins don't have to be perfect either. I did speed this up too, just because it is the same thing over and over and over again. But I'll show you how to secure the yarn at the very end of this video before we move on to finishing it. So there we go. Now what I like to do here is add, just weave it in through one side, and that is mostly just to keep it tight. So we're on the bottom of the pumpkin, and I'm just weaving it through here. I'm not adding a knot or anything, but this is just to keep the yarn tight and not allow it to gain any slack. So that's also why my fingers are holding on to it, just again, to keep it tight. Then we're just going to feed the yarn from the bottom back up to the top. And in the next part, I'll show you how to secure the yarn so that it doesn't go anywhere and how to hide it. To secure the yarn, all I'm going to do is pick a random strand of yarn. I'm going to weave my needle through it, and then I'm going to create a knot by weaving the needle through this big old loop right there. And now it's not going to go anywhere. I also hate weaving in my ends, so what I'm going to do is just cut it so I have a decent tail, and then I'm going to take my crochet hook and I'm going to push it into the center of my hole because no one's going to know. How are they going to know? So, plus once I add the stem, it'll be pretty well hidden, especially if I decide to hot glue it. But that's it. That's how you make a pumpkin. The next part is just going to cover the stem, but the crochet part is done. For the stem, I'm using a cinnamon stick. This is a fake cinnamon stick I got from Hobby Lobby. I wouldn't use real cinnamon. Well, maybe it's real. I don't think it's real. I'm pretty sure it's fake. But it smells like cinnamon. So what I'm going to do is push it into the center. It doesn't matter if the top ends up being the bottom. Just whichever one you prefer. And now I'm going to cut it. And this is what you should not do. In case you're wondering, it flew across the room behind a piece of furniture and I still can't find it. So we're going to try this again. This time I'm going to be a little bit more gentle with my cutting. At first I was upset that these pieces are broken, but it actually ends up working in my favor because you can just make them fit a little bit better. And yeah, there we go. So you have the option of using hot glue to secure it in place better. If you plan on selling them, I would add hot glue just because it's better. I've burned myself one too many times, so I'm just gonna stick it in there and call it a day. But this is how you make a pumpkin. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and thank you so much for sticking around.